Hello. Wonderful to see you, Melissa.
Hello, Liz. How are you?
I am excellent. How have you been doing?
Pretty good. It's been a wild week.
Exactly. Hi, Jonah.
Hey, am I in the room?
Yes, you are, my dear. You need to go to room 1. So what you can do is you go on the little hamburger, and it will on the upper left-hand corner, and then it will drop down, and you can pick out my events, and then you'll be able to navigate to room 1.
Joined events.
Yep.
Are you sure you want to leave the event?
You do. You'll be okay. It will, and then you can actually.
And he's gone. Now, I was just with Brian in room 2.
Yes.
And then, okay. Then I was magically transported here. I love the technology.
I know, right? So Nofar, I met her at a sourcing summit, and we just coined the term wormhole because it seems like it sucks you in.
Exactly.
I love it. Yeah. Wonderful. Malcolm is coming onto stage. I love it.
There's
Malcolm.
Hello. How are you?
I love it. Yay. Hey. So
this is what's yet another one of the hilarious things about this is room 2 apparently is the URL that ends in summit-5, and room 1 is the one that ends in summit-4. So, you know, that's.
We don't want people to figure out our All right. Well, welcome. We're so excited to have you as part of this panel. I want to, Dion won't be able to join us. She has a very sad family emergency, and so our hearts are out with Dion very strongly, and we wish all the best. COVID times are not easy times. And with that, here, and really appreciated, we wanted to get together as we talk about the role of learning. And we've seen over the last couple of months a different awareness in saying, okay, here D&I and learning need to partner together. What are those opportunities there? And where oftentimes in the past, it's been a little bit of a Band-Aid to say, oh, D&I, well, we'll just do compliance trainings and we'll do, unconscious bias trainings and hope for the best because that's going to help. But actually looking at how are we systemically and systematically looking at what will really make a difference, and how are we seeing people as whole people? Those are those aspects when we talk to real inclusion, equity, et cetera, that are finally getting a little bit of a different space. And so that's the idea behind this panel, is to say, okay, what's that role of us in learning in terms of really leaning in, and how are we creating a sustainable culture around inclusion? What do we need to get out there? So I am so pleased to have all of you here, and one of you, because you got a text basically like an hour and a half ago and just said yes. So I would love it if you would all please introduce yourself. And Melissa, I will start with you. Just a little bit about who you are and what what excites you about the current kind of D&I discussion.
Right. Well, thank you so much. It's really exciting to be here. My name's Melissa Taylor, and I lead out in strategy, insights, and learning for a purpose communications consultancy called Porter Novelli. And I'm based in Atlanta. We have offices all across the U.S., Europe, Mexico, and Canada. But I'll tell you what I'm so excited about is that we truly have moved in a substantive way. I'm sure we have room to grow, but we've moved in a substantive way to rethinking what diversity, equity, and inclusion training means. And it is, every day seems like another moment of heartache and heartbreak. But I feel as though, for me personally, this is an opportunity to apply my passion and my profession, and truly feel like I have the opportunity, one workshop, one team, one organization at a time, to try to make a positive impact.
Beautifully said, Melissa. Thank you. So agreed. Very good. Malcolm, welcome, my brain trust buddy.
It's good to see you, Liz. Thank you. Malcolm Carter. I am a solution architect for Hemsley Frazier, which is a learning and development consulting firm. Our world headquarters is based in the UK. I'm part of the US group. We also have offices in Germany, in Frankfurt, as well as in Toronto. And my background has been long time L&D. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging has been a passion of mine. Prior to this role, I was the global learning head for Hexcel Corporation, and then also the learning sourcing leader for GE Crotonville for all of their global learning. This area has been very special to me for a long time. My father was someone who marched in the civil rights with Dr. King. He was very good friends with Rosa Parks. And so it's been something that's been part of my life for a long time. I'm also a PhD student. Fingers crossed that I finish in June next year. I can get some sleep finally. And my focus is in this space: diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. That's what my dissertation is on. Right now with Hemsley Frazier, we are focused on a lot of things dealing with L&D, but it's a huge area right now, and I'm leading our group globally, and that's the diversity and inclusion group. So a lot of stuff going on all over.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Yeah. So Malcolm, great. It's that piece of what is that impact that we bring to the table. Thank you. Awesome. Nofar.
My turn. So I'm here representing. No, I'm representing myself, but I'm representing this sourcing and recruiting perspective. I've been recruiting for many years, and for the first few years, 7 or 8 years, I've been writing people's resumes, and I've been consulting them on how to look for a job. And then I just moved through recruiting domestically, and then recruiting executives, and then recruiting globally. And the more you move up the ladder of salaries and status, the less people you have to talk to. And the diversity issue becomes more and more dominant, and I have less and less effects, which I don't like. Impact. And for freelance, for headhunters, the impact is minimal unless you do something about it. And one of the very few good things that happened with the pandemic is the world becoming very virtual, and you have more access and you have more stages to talk on. And this is how you meet people like Liz. And I find myself, talking, thinking, writing about diversity issues more and more. So I'm here to give you my 2 cents about the issue and how it incorporates with in-house learning and training.
Wonderful. And what country are you joining us from, my dear?
Oh, I didn't say. I'm from Israel, where diversity and inclusion are just starting to be talked about. It's always been there, but it's very different from Europe and the States. But still, it's an issue that needs a lot of work on. So Israel, we're quarantined right now. That's why I have all this free time, Liz.
Appreciate it. Love it. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brian.
Hi, everybody. Brian O'Neill. I'm a development seems to be in my career, learning and development, leadership development, organizational development. talent management. That's been my wheelhouse for the last, I don't know, 400 or 500 years. Yeah.
At least 100 years, right?
And especially the current decade, which is comprised of the year 2020.
Yes, exactly.
Because I think we will look back on this, years from now, we will look back on this year as the year that lasted a decade. There's just been so much that has gone on this particular year. I'm starting a new role for a company called American Homes for Rent. It is a very large single family homes rental real estate investment trust. And there are 52,000 single family rental homes in the portfolio. And it's a growing like a weed company. I'm specifically coming in as a leadership development advisor. And one of the main pieces that I've been asked to advise on is the whole diversity, equity, inclusion pieces, and how these work in and how they integrate. My philosophy has always been that this is not a bolt-on. This is an integration of these philosophies and these principles into absolutely everything that we do, all the way down to the micro levels. And so, I've been guided. If I have mentors in this space, there's a lady named Heather Wishick, who wrote a book about 25 years ago that spoke to a lot of these things. So ask me about the concept of dominant roles and subordinate roles, and I can tell you a lot about those things. I'm also a huge fan of the concept of not just accepting differences, not just valuing differences, but celebrating differences. And that is the only way that companies will truly grow, and making the business case for that. Because from a business point of view, without the celebration of differences along every sort of cleavage line you can think of, you will never have good innovation. You will never have new ideas. You will never have true long-term growth for any company. So there's a business case to be made for diversity, equity, inclusion principles that I think sometimes a lot of CEOs and your leaders tend to miss. And so that's kind of some of the places where I come from in this journey.
Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more. I think, that's one of the key questions, as we were talking through what we'd like to talk about today, because I think that you just hooked it in terms of what is the actual celebration. So what I think would probably be helpful is, is there a difference between inclusion and diversity in learning? And what does it mean to you? Yeah. Malcolm, you want to take that one on?
Sure.
Mr. PhD student.
Absolutely. Diversity and inclusion. So I really kind of look at the model of really being diversity plus equity equals inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of if an inclusion is what people should allow for others to be included. And then the invert of inclusion is belonging. So are you feeling a sense of belonging because there's inclusion that's happening? Mm. So diversity to me is when you have a variety of different types of people who are part of organizations and groups, no matter if it's based on sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, people who have disabilities and gender, so on and so forth. But the inclusion piece, and that's really what a lot of organizations that I'm seeing are really desiring, and we're trying to frame that in a way that makes sense for them. But having an avenue to include people so they have a sense of belonging.
Yeah. Absolutely. Very, very good. Very, very good. And I think it's that piece of, here, if I feel like I'm belonging, it also comes into that aspect of, do I feel psychologically safe that I can have a different opinion, that I can bring myself in, and I don't have to code switch according to the different environment, that I can be myself.
That was exactly what I was going to speak to as well. And I love, Malcolm, that you brought in belonging. As I've been talking with a variety of organizations about the kinds of training and workshops they'd like to do, as we look at sort of the series, one of the things that I've realized as a keystone is talking about what does it look like and what does it take to create a culture of belonging. And so we talk about, there's the aspect of mattering, recognizing people for their unique strengths and the contributions that they bring. So there's kind of the uniqueness, that inherent need that we have to be seen and heard and valued. And then there's that sense of I'm part of a team, right? And so I'm part of this tribe. And that's another aspect of belonging. But then there's this whole level of psychological safety and really, truly feeling like you can bring your whole self to work and be accepted and not rejected, not marginalized. You can be open to learn and grow along with the organization, that you're valued for your contributions, and that you can challenge the status quo. And when you can start to work towards that, then you've got this really fertile ground for as you're trying to help people navigate through, okay, what are these unconscious biases that I have? And what's the impact that they're having? What are some of the things that I'm doing that I might have great intention, but it has a bad impact? So how can I start to feel safe enough to admit that and learn so that we can continue to have dialogue? And it's much messier, right, than a nice little tick box, but that's where we can really get change.
It's a cultural thing, right, Melissa? I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. If you can really look at where you are culturally, then you can start looking at the pieces to really build. So, when I talk to organizations, and I'm talking to one right now that has the CEO is convinced that this is something that we need to have for the organization, but they don't know what to do. They're global. They have a lot of their staff in sub-Saharan Africa, which has a whole nother, issue with diversity. As you go to Uganda, and if you're a gay and lesbian, then there are some serious issues. So we have to make sure we protect them. But once you're able to get the culture thinking this way, and understanding unconscious bias, micro inequities, which exist so much, then you can start looking at what we need to do to build our company. Is it the recruiting? Is it the retention? Is it the salary, having equal salary amongst people? Is it the promotion and succession planning? Is it supplier diversity? So, and then that opens the door and allows for the culture to really build and grow over a period of time. So it doesn't end. It's a hot topic right now, but I think the thing that we have to do is keep the fire going.
Yeah.
I've been talking to Liz before we got together here. I always look at it as the metaphor of the allergic kid in the class. I've been telling you about this. Diversity, then you bring the people in, but you need them to stay. You want them to stay. And you have this one allergic kid in the class, and the learning position is to be the teacher and just make sure that this kid feels like a part of the class without creating and antagonizing. I'm sorry for my accent. But have the whole class accept that person because they have it's a disability. It's a difference. It's something different about that kid, which is not in his power to change. And it all depends how the teacher presents this to the class. I mean, everybody's going to be upset because they can't have something because this kid is allergic to it, or can it be like an inclusive adventure for the whole class to learn how to eat something else or to do something different? So this is how the learning comes in. I mean, the recruiters bring in the people, and then you have to be sure that they would want to stay. And actually, diversity means money. It's also, the more diverse a company is, and it's now research has shown this, the more successful a company can be. Because a team which is more diverse, is more creative, has more different perspective on resolving challenges, resolving problems. So this is also worthwhile for a company to do business-wise. It's not just the moral thing, the humane thing. It has a lot of meaning in the business realm as well. So if you're the learning function, you're the teacher in that classroom to be sure that that kid wants to stay and will feel like it belongs. The whole class will be more successful. This is I have a lactose intolerant kid, so this is a touchy issue. allergic to dairy. What can I do? I want everybody to like her. So it's me and the teacher together, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I always see it in my mind like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important, and you touched upon a subject which I think is really important, because one of the aspects that when it's just talking about the diversity aspect of KPIs and creating groups out of otherness, one of the biggest problems is if I feel like I'm just there out of that aspect, I'm not going to have a positive employee experience because I don't really belong. You're looking at my otherness rather than how how we're enriching together, and how my unique experience is something that we can tap into and that I feel comfortable bringing to the table. And so I think that that's also an important piece as we look to diversity and inclusion, that it's not about the KPIs, it's about the piece around, or broader, to say, okay, how are we, you know, to do what Brian was saying, how are we celebrating and understanding? I was, you know, one example that I like to share is I was working in a plant in Germany and had a hard time, you know, discussing like, okay, can't we have prayer time for our Muslim community? We have a lot of Muslim team members. And the only way I was able to convince my very heavily smoking HR department that we needed to do something, I'm like, you guys don't clock in and clock out every time you go to have a smoke. Why is it okay to be a smoker, but not to have prayer time? And so, you know, and that was that piece to click to say, okay, hey, how are we making space and being equal about it rather than weighing one over the other, and to have a little bit of, like Nofar said, how do we have access to understand that we can either make it a, you know, a celebration, or we can make it a, oh, why are we doing that? When it really
yeah. I had an organization, Liz, that I met with recently, and they really want to do the right thing, and it's clear globally. And we did a survey, so I always think that it's really kind of key to get the feedback from organizations, from everyone, to understand where they are in this space, where they feel like the organization is, and how are they feeling in terms of belonging. And so they had a survey as a U.S.-based company, and they had a section for U.S., and then they had a section for the rest of the world. And I kind of said, you know what? That's not really being very inclusive.
Well, the rest of the world is all the same, right?
Exactly. And but you know, they just got quiet all of a sudden, and the subject never came back up when we combined everything with the survey. But as little things like that, that we go through our day and forget about, because we get busy and we're thinking about ourselves sometimes, or just the work that we have to do. And I get it, we all do that to an extent, but we have to have a culture that allows for this.
Well, not to beat on a, you know, continuing drum, but you know, this notion of psychological safety too, where we can have the people who are the challengers, and they can help to be sort of those moral guides, a conscience for us. Because the fact is, you know, the more stressed or tired, whatever we are, that is when, you know, our guards, our consciousness kind of, you know, diminishes, and those implicit biases start to come out, and we do start to be more inward versus being empathetic. And I always appreciate just kind of having those reminders that help me stay aware, right? And continue to learn. And I'm thinking too, role in learning and development is really powerful too, because at the end of the day, it's about behavior change. And when you look at culture change, you know, if you bring it all the way back down, it's about the collective, you know, repeating patterns of behaviors of individuals. And so we can take that sort of understanding and perspective and apply this to, again, how do we help people understand what's going on? It's not about unconscious bias training. It's not about shaming people. It's not about making them feel stuck, you know, and not able to do or say anything. it's actually another way to kind of just remind us that we are all human. There's this one common principle: we're human.
Yeah.
And if you are human and breathing, you have unconscious bias. So how do we start from there and then move, to deepen kind of our understanding about what we do with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And how do we make those groupings without seeing, one thing that we like to bring up, and it was cute, Brian and I were joking about, like, is this meeting really starting at 6:30 a.m.? Yeah, it's 9:40 my time. So yeah, this aspect of it's going to be uncomfortable for somebody, but if we all want to get together, how do we do it? And being very conscious about how are we speaking to it, to say, okay, how do we make these decisions? And doing those little rotations of that habitual behavior, rather than saying, okay, everything is according to, and this is a great comment in the comment section, that dominant culture, and saying not everything is according to headquarters, and that at times can be a radical act.
I wanted to address that, if that's all right, because Christina, I saw in the chat, brought that question up. Fascinating question. How do you address the dominant culture in a workplace with the assimilation argument, which goes against diversity and inclusion? And the way I've always framed it is, what are we assimilating to? That's the question. The culture of a workplace, in my opinion, is not fixed. It's a moving target. It grows and continues its journey down. The only things, in my opinion, that should be fixed and immutable as a part of a company culture are its values. What is it? What does the company stand for? What does the company believe in? My company that I worked for several years, Aimco, which is a real estate investment trust here in Denver, one of their core values was we live with gusto. And that's a fun word, and it describes the idea of high energy and so on. And to me, that's an immutable value. In other words, we want to make sure that everybody in the workplace has that chance to express gusto, that has that chance to live with gusto as they're moving forward. But if the dominant culture in a workplace is things like, we always start virtual meetings at 9:00 a.m. Eastern time, or we have one get together every year for for all of our staff, and we don't call it the Christmas party anymore because that's against diversity, equity, inclusion. So we just call it the holiday party, and that's when we have the one get together of all of our folks. Those are things that the dominance in the dominant norm has taken over, and we're not looking at the subordinate norms. We're not looking at how do we be more inclusive. Is there a way, for instance, in a party situation, why shouldn't we have one of those every quarter? I mean, if we're celebrating the winter, why don't we celebrate the spring and celebrate the summer and celebrate the fall? I mean, if we're going to do it that way, because otherwise, if we're just celebrating the winter and it just so happens to be the week before Christmas, guess what we're really celebrating here, folks? And think about the folks who are not necessarily in the dominant culture that celebrate Christmas, how they feel about that kind of setup. So to me, it is what we want to assimilate among our team members is our values. And this goes back to, by the way, and I've talked to this about recruiting and hiring folks as well. There is a movement now to get away from this idea of we hire for culture and instead say we hire for values, and then they bring more to the culture. They add to the culture because their values are in alignment with what we're looking for. That's the kind of thinking we have to get to if we truly want to get to a celebration of differences and a truly inclusive workplace.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. And number one, I just want to let you know it's a treat. Normally, I meet with Brian every Thursday because we're in the same cohort. So I get to hear his brilliant mind this afternoon here on the East Coast. So it was great to see Brian. Very, very true. We really have to think about, number one, listen to people, right? There's so much into just listening and not being defensive. Sometimes we get a chance we want to correct people or say things in very small things that really have an effect on the overall culture. I'll give you a perfect example, something I heard this morning. There's a gentleman who was born in Swaziland, and he gets corrected all the time. Said, "No, you mean Switzerland." And he's like, "No, I mean Swaziland." but it's the idea that, listen and try to understand, where people are, allowing them to really kind of have their voices and really having them be included. The research states that organizations that bring in a diverse group of people, practice pluralism, really are become much more not just competitive, but also more innovative than any homogenous environment that people work in. And so in order for that to really work, and Melissa said it earlier in terms of, the retention piece, or maybe it was Nofar, I can't remember who it was, but the idea of keeping people in this environment for the long term really boosts your business more than people realize. But it has to be a welcoming situation and really capturing those pieces like
Brian's
really
mentioning. It makes me think,
mentioning.
just reflecting on a couple of things that each of you have shared, that it's wonderful that we've got the business data and the case, right, to show just how impactful diversity is and diverse organizations are in terms of, again, competitive difference and innovation and, even just profitability. But I don't want to underestimate the moral imperative, because I think that without that, you don't have the will to stick with it. Because the fact is that it's also hard. There are some inefficiencies that you're going to have to work through until you get to that point where we are celebrating differences and truly to a point of adaptation, right? And where we're not expecting everyone to adapt to dominant culture, but everyone is willing to recognize and adapt to one another in order to bring out the best. And that takes some effort. And it is one of my fears, right? Like I'm grateful for the focus and kind of the white hot intention, right now around this. Yeah. But we can't let that, like, as soon as that starts to die down, is the moral will there to kind of keep doing the hard work?
Yes.
So well said. And I think that's why, as we talk to what are the values, what are the principles of what we do and what we don't do, and making it more explicit, because this is also came into the chat as to what are those values perhaps on the poster in terms of what we espouse. But when it comes to real behavioral, change and say, like I said, what do we do and what do we not do? If we don't have the principles aligned with our values, then it becomes just this piece of, we tried that.
Policy is huge with that. Some companies have policies around this and stating, what those values are, but it starts from the top of the organization, and it really should filter down in terms of making sure that that these values are expressed. If it doesn't start there, and there's no incentive to really kind of continue this somehow, some way, then the express values are not going to be there. Coming in and with you who've done consulting with organizations or work within organizations who focus on in this space, once you start collecting the data in terms of where people are, it's always pretty much the same with organizations where their policies don't match up. You have to get the recommendations that they may not necessarily want to hear. But have those recommendations in a way so that the express values that Fred is mentioning really come across. And again, having this be a long-term type of ongoing values that we have, so it's not hand grenade values that you throw over the fence and you kind of walk away from when you're doing learning. It has
the thing I've seen in my experience has been many companies, unfortunately, and this goes back to people. I say companies, but it's people, it's the senior leaders, tend to look at these kinds of things that they look at the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion almost the same way you as a human being would look at a headache and say to yourself, okay, I can pop a couple of pills and boom, pain's gone. Don't have to worry about it. Pain, it's completely out of the picture.
Yeah.
This is the reason why the word systemic racism have popped up now in the most recent situations that are going on in the U.S. It is a systemic issue, similar to being overweight, or similar to having high blood pressure, or similar to having heart disease or diabetes or something like that. And what that takes is not popping a couple of pills and saying, poof, it goes away and everything's fine. That is changing habits, changing specific behaviors, making those behaviors habits over time, constant monitoring, checking on progress, seeing how far you've come, whether or not you've got this in at least remission, if not into a cure stage, but continuing then to maintain. Many people who suffer from long-term chronic illness have to do regimens for the rest of their life. In my opinion, that's the exact same way that senior leaders need to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. You cannot simply just toss off and say, do another awareness training. I mean, number one, I'm reading Jennifer Brown right now, How to Be an Inclusive Leader, as she talks about the time for awareness on this whole stuff is over. It is long gone. If you are not aware by now that there are systemic issues around the dominance and subordinates in society, dominant norms and subordinate norms in society, however you want to cleave those, then you've been living on a different planet your entire life. So now the question is, if you're aware and you know there's an issue, thank God you're at step 1 of the 12-step program, right? First step is to admit that there's an issue.
Yep.
Now the question is, what do we do to embed this, incorporate it into our value system, incorporate it into how we evaluate people as to whether or not they're being successful in the organization, how we celebrate the idea that we have all these differences, how we ensure that we've got these differences to maintain our innovative competitive advantage. What specifically are we getting into our other processes and systems to make sure that this is a long-term, ongoing search for the ultimate cure? Because the other thing that won't happen is there is nothing on earth that will solve this for a company in 1 week or 2 weeks, probably not in 1 year or 2 years, maybe in 10 years.
I was going to say that I was going to hit on that point exactly, Brian, that at least from the U.S. perspective, you don't undo 400 years of racism and oppression with, a 6-month program even.
A 90-minute online.
Certainly not a 90-minute online, self-learning module. And so I think that, both sort of sharing with people and getting leaders to see that this is a multi-step, systemic solution to a systemic problem. But also, listen, I'm an optimist by nature. And as dark as these times have been, I really feel passionately about helping people to see the importance of progress and making steps forward, right? So one of the things that, whether I'm talking to leaders or I'm doing training, is to really encourage a growth mindset. And that means that this is a continuous journey. We can change. It's going to take time. We're not going to get it perfect. I love what Dr. Dolly Chugg says in her book. She talks about stumbling upward, and it's like, we're going to make mistakes in this. We're not going to get everything right, but we've got to be committed to moving forward.
I want to touch on what Melissa said and the headache that Brian brought up. Because I was talking, actually, I started by introducing myself like someone who has no impact, because I'm an outside function. I recruit. I'm a headhunter. And I was actually noticing that using the data, as cynical as it is, using the data is how you market your wish to impact the processes and get the processes going. The market I mainly work at is Israel, obviously, and we're barely at step one. There's awareness. We have different problems. We have more than 400 years. We have 2,000 years of in the process. And the moral is behind the will. But how do you get the will going with the decision makers?
Exactly. You get the data.
You have to get to the decision makers, because you can't make a change if you don't get the whole system behind it. And for that to happen, you have to have resources. You have to have someone in the organization who handles this specifically, D&I and the learning, and everybody has to work together. Because I was talking about this in the TA Global Day. We also had a D&I panel. And I'm a big believer that, you have to go to the roots. You have to go to the community to go from, to incorporate the community and the company. So diversity won't be an issue, because it will be a mentality. It will be a culture. But in order to do that, you need the resources, and to get the resources, you need the decision makers, and decision makers live, breathe, dream revenues, and success is the success. And it's very a cynical world, and we're all talking D&I, but we're not the decision makers usually. We usually aren't. Sometimes we are. So we have to influence it somehow and get the program going, get everybody on the program. And I completely agree with you, Melissa. I think, we have to do it because we want to be healthier. We want, this is a headache, but we want to be healthier as an organization. So we have to start in the dark places to see the light. Very cliche, but I think that's how it works.
And it's yeah, I mean, we have to be inclusive. The thing that we're doing now in the United States, especially, it's not just within the organization, but we're such a polarized country right now. And the leadership that we're talking within an organization deals with our day-to-day, our 9 to 5. But when you go home, what are some of the factors that are affecting how you make decisions? Germany has had their own issues, right, Liz, over the course of the last 70, 80 years, 90 years now. Obviously with Israel and issues that are going on there, but we have to figure out a way where we embed this with leaders from both sides and cultures within, and figure out how we can combine them. The inclusive leadership piece. I know Brian's funny. I was just talking to Jennifer Brown yesterday, and she was just mentioning that, just in fact, yep, that's exactly right. It's so funny. And she was we were just talking, random phone call, and really focus on the fact that the leaders really need to start and build that and figure out how they can, we talk about strategy, right? If you start off with leadership, truly believing the communication, the planning that you do around them, breaking down with diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging type committees, and then having them also have outreach to the organization and build your learning competencies around those, you can have success no matter if you are in Germany or in Brazil or where have you. But we have to start focusing on the systemic issues and then systematically resolving them.
Very well said. Oh my goodness, you guys. I can't say how appreciative I am for this wonderful panel discussion. I think you brought an important amount of light to how are we finding that way out of the darkness, so to speak. And saying, how are we choosing health and beauty? How are we choosing a space where those differences are celebrated? Because that plurality, it's not just something that we see, It's something that we feel. So I like to say, you know, when we talk about belonging, I belong in a family, meaning I can have my, I can have my little edges, but I, you know, and that's part of the beauty. And that for me is that psychological safety, is that beauty is part of it, and it's part of that love. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Everyone can connect with this illustrious and wonderful human beings on this panel.
It's great being here. Thank you all.
I'm going to. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. All right. Well, I'm going to be sending you back out onto the floor, and then I'll be sucking you back in, and then Cordelia will
Thank you
on stage. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.